Hi friends. On 23rd June 2016, British voters voted in a referendum on whether their country should remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union. The campaign to leave the European Union has won the referendum. Almost 52% voters voted to leave the EU. It means the UK is now committed to withdrawing from the group of 28 countries, a process that has come to be known as Brexit. Today we will talk about what that means for the UK, EU and India. First of all, why was the vote called? British Prime Minister David Cameron courted the Conservative and anti-EU voters during the last election by promising to hold a referendum on the UK's membership of the 28-nation bloc by the end of 2017. Those who campaigned to leave say that the EU has evolved into an undemocratic and oppressive entity, far removed from its original purpose as a trading bloc that Britain originally joined in 1973. They claim that only a British exit or Brexit can restore sovereignty and effectively limit immigration. Those campaigning to remain argue that the EU ensures peace and prosperity for more than 500 million people from Portugal to Finland, and that the benefits far outweigh the costs. Now, who can vote in this referendum? British and Irish citizens over 18 years old who are resident in the UK, as well as UK residents from Commonwealth countries who have the right to live in the country, can vote. What is on the ballot paper? Voters are asked to answer one question: should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? There are two options: leave or remain the European Union. So what changes after the referendum? The Prime Minister of UK, David Cameron, has resigned. He will officially stand down by October 2016. In principle, nothing changes immediately. Britons remain EU citizens and business continues as before. In practice, many believe trade, investment and political decisions will quickly anticipate British departure from the EU bloc. The EU could also face a Britain breaking apart if Europhile Scots make another push for independence and seek to join the EU on their own. There is a Brussels consensus that Britain must be made an example of for trying to leave and will face a chilly future cast out to perhaps talk its way back later into some kind of trade access in return for concessions such as free migration from inside the bloc and contributions to the EU budget, things which Brexit voters want to end but which the likes of Norway and Switzerland have accepted in varying forms. Now, what does this crisis mean for the EU? This represents the biggest setback in decades for those who support the idea of European unity. The EU will be changed forever. It has already been dealing with multiple crises in recent years, but this could and probably will dwarf them all. The President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, said it was not a moment for hysterical reaction, but speaking on behalf of the leaders of the other 27 EU countries, he said that they were all determined to maintain their unity. The divorce negotiations of the UK from the EU will last at least 2 years, a vastly complicated and um, a complicated legal and political process. The rest of the EU will want to forge a good deal with the British government, but in many capitals there will be little appetite for doing the UK any favours. That's partly because Euroscepticism is on the rise across the continent and influential political leaders will not want to give the impression that leaving the EU is easy. France and Germany, along with other like-minded countries, may now try to push ahead with further integration in some areas without the UK holding them back. But for the moment, they are trying to digest the fact that Europe's political order has been overturned with far-reaching consequences that no one can accurately predict. What are the effects of the Brexit on the economy? First, the British pound. The pound is expected to fall heavily, but not so much because the markets expect the economy to suddenly collapse into a recession, although many experts believe that leaving the EU will hurt the economy. Stock markets. The effects of Brexit may be felt far beyond British shores, but given there were so many warnings from so many large UK companies that Brexit would damage their prospects, it is expected to hit share values in Britain first. Bond yields. As share prices tumble, many investigators tend to switch their money into safer options such as traditionally bonds. The more money that pours into bonds, the less interest they pay, and they have already been at historically low levels for years. The shock of Brexit is likely to push those yields even lower until investors are actually paying some governments for the right to lend their money. That might happen in Germany, Japan, US, and even the UK. The obverse of that is that in riskier economies, the opposite might happen, and the cost of borrowing in places like Greece, Spain, and Italy might rise. Housing market. In the run-up to the referendum, there were signs that the housing market, especially in London and southeast England, was slowing down, as buyers and especially rich foreign purchasers waited to see which way the result went. Now that the UK has voted to leave, that trend is likely to become much firmer. Foreign buyers might be reluctant to invest the huge sums needed to buy prime London property when they don't know what the economic and political future holds. Inward investment and trade. So much of this depends on the deal that the UK now negotiates with the rest of the EU, although in the short term there may be less investment in Britain and a falling pound could boost exports. Long term, a great deal of investment is because of the UK's access to the single market of over 500 million people across the EU and the European Free Trade Association. Many countries will be after a slice of that cake, and so the deal the UK does with the EU is all important. That is why many believe the UK will have to stay part of the single market, and no country has managed to do that without allowing for free immigration from the rest of the EU. What challenges lie ahead of the UK when leaving the EU? The UK special deal has been scrapped, the deal that Prime Minister David Cameron negotiated with the EU in February, giving the UK a special status as an EU member, will now be scrapped. The UK won a guarantee that it would not suffer discrimination by being outside the Eurozone. That was to safeguard the City of London's authority as Europe's biggest financial centre. In return, the UK pledged not to block deeper Eurozone integration. If the UK managed to negotiate continued access to the EU single market on preferential terms, the deal is unlikely to include the non-discrimination safeguards. Withdrawal negotiations and Article 50. David Cameron has now said he will stand down by October and pass on to his successor the role of invoking the EU's Article 50 procedure to negotiate the terms of the UK withdrawal. Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, which has never been used before, sets a 2-year time limit for reaching a deal. Generally seen as a tight deadline, it can be extended only if all 28 member states agree. Once the UK tells the EU that it is withdrawing under Article 50, it shall not participate in the discussions of the European Council or in decisions concerning it, according to the rule. So the UK will be cut out of EU decision making at the highest level before it actually leaves the EU. The process requires the UK to unpick some 80,000 pages of laws binding the UK to the EU. Some will be kept because some areas of EU policy are shared with non-EU countries like Norway and Switzerland. Under this divorce settlement, as some have called it, the UK and EU must agree how to divide assets, resolve EU budget issues, and set out the future rights of EU nationals in the UK and vice versa. The settlement requires approval by a majority of EU members plus the European Parliament and UK Parliament. New trade relationship. If the EU waits until the UK's formal withdrawal, the negotiations might drag on for another 5 years or more. Pending a deal, the UK will trade with the EU under the World Trade Organization rules. That would mean UK exporters paying new EU import tariffs and facing non-tariff barriers in the same way that China and the US trade with the EU. UK services accounting for 80% of the UK economy would lose their preferential access to the EU single market. Free trade deals that the EU negotiated with 53 countries, including Canada, Singapore, and South Korea, will no longer apply to the UK. If the UK wants the benefits of them, it will have to renegotiate with these countries. The Remain camp said that full access to the EU single market, the world's biggest free trade area with 500 million consumers, was crucial for the UK. But free movement of workers, payments into the EU budget, and acceptance of the EU rulebook are conditions for that access. The EU is unlikely to bend on those conditions because it does not want more members to leave the club. The UK might well sign up to those conditions, but it would not be able to influence EU rules as it would lack a vote. Many in the Brexit camp see that position, exemplified by Norway, as unacceptable. The UK's main selling point is that it is a big market for EU exports such as French food and German cars. No more budget contributions. The UK will stop paying into the EU budget once it formally leaves the bloc. So the UK's current net contribution of about £8.5 billion annually will stay at home. It could be spent partly on the National Health Service or used to scrap VAT on fuel. But UK farmers will no longer get direct payments from the EU, which were worth about £2.4 billion pounds in 2015, so it is not clear how much of that, if any, the UK government will continue to pay. Nor is it clear how much the UK's poorest regions will get in future, now that they no longer qualify for EU regional funding. The immigration challenge. The UK will try to reduce immigration from the EU, possibly with a points-based system like Australia's. It means giving priority to high-skilled workers and blocking entry to low-skilled workers. Many job seekers from the EU may be told to leave. Scotland and Northern Ireland. Scotland, London, and Northern Ireland very clearly voted to remain. The rest of the UK voted to leave. In fact, London is the only region in the whole of England that voted to stay. This makes it clear that there is a deep cultural and economic divide in the country, one that is only going to get worse after this referendum forces all of the UK to detach from the European Union. This has turned focus back on the question of how united the UK actually is. The Scottish independence referendum only took place 2 years, with the no side winning by 55%. The stark divide in results means that there is enough of a platform for Scottish politicians to once again call for independence. Now, what does this mean for India? As a government and a foreign policy establishment, India had no real dog in the fight. It has never quite understood the strategic coherence of the EU as a political entity as opposed to a common market. New Delhi has preferred bilateral relations with individual European capitals, whether London, Berlin, Paris. In a sense, this was analogous to those in the Leave segment in Britain, not to speak of those representing the growing anti-Brussels mood in many European countries from France to Spain, who have felt that the EU did not really represent them and that trade facilitation mechanism had simply gone too far. There were other Indians, primarily the white-collar executives in the City of London, the financial district of London, and in the IT and biotech sectors or in academia, who had moved to Britain in the past 20-odd years, in the period of a cool Britannia anchored in Europe. They were horrified by the idea of a Brexit and voted against it, as did their peers from white or other ethnic backgrounds. This is the educated cosmopolitan elite that is a product of the globalized world and has fully used the benefits of free movement from London to cities and countries across the Channel. Older generation Indians, as well as Indians from outside the background described just now, they seemed to be more willing to listen to the Leave slogan. These included Gujarati and Punjabi migrants from an earlier age who have seen Eastern European migration from Poland and Bulgaria, for instance, and displaced them in the low-skilled jobs market. Again, this mirrors white sentiment in similar socio-economic groups, especially in the old industrial towns of northern England with high working-class unemployment. Finally, there are those who have used Britain as a base for doing business across the EU. Many global corporations are in this situation, and understandably they are mortified. Of the 800 Indian companies that have invested in Britain, a few dozen have genuine cause for concern, whether the IT companies that work with the British financial services industry or the Jaguar Land Rover now owned by Tata Motors. Most of the other Indian companies ostensibly based in Britain are shell operations designed to round-trip money or funnel family investments into the London property market. As of now, the world is in shock over Britain's exit from the EU or Brexit. And that's the update for now. Watch this space. So if you enjoyed watching our video, please like, comment and subscribe.